If your garden is a balcony, a strip of dirt by the fence, or a few pots on a patio, this video was made for you. You're about to find out how 10 common vegetables can hand you double, even triple the harvest you're getting right now, without 1 extra square foot of ground. All it takes is training them to grow up instead of out. And stick with me all the way to vegetable number 9, because that one crop can multiply your harvest by up to 8 times on the exact same patch of dirt. Here's the short version of why this works. A plant sprawled flat on the ground shades itself. The top leaves hog the sunlight, and the ones underneath barely get enough to earn their keep. Stand that same plant up, and light reaches nearly every leaf. That single shift is why intensive trellised growing regularly produces double or triple what a flat spread-out bed gives you from the same footprint. Now let's get into the vegetables, starting with the one almost every home gardener already has in the ground. Vegetable number 1 is the indeterminate tomato, and it's the clearest example of wasted space in the whole garden. Left alone, a single plant sprawls across 10 to 12 square feet, and here's what most people don't connect. Every fruit sitting on damp soil is sitting in a hotspot for early blight and other fungal disease, because moisture trapped against the leaf or a tomato skin is exactly what fungal spores need to get started. Train that same plant onto a string trellis or a sturdy cage, and its footprint shrinks to about 1.5 square feet. Standing the vine up does double duty. It doesn't just save space. It opens the whole plant to airflow, which dries the leaves faster and starves that fungus of the moisture it needs. Trellised tomatoes commonly produce close to double the fruit per square foot of a sprawling plant, and nearly 7 servings worth from a patch of ground the size of a doormat. Where beginners go wrong is letting every side shoot grow unchecked, turning the plant into a leafy jungle instead of a fruit factory. Pinch off those lateral suckers once a week, and the plant redirects that energy into fewer, bigger clusters of fruit. Remember this one. A pruned tomato vine is a fed tomato vine. Every leaf you remove is more food going straight to the fruit instead of getting lost in foliage nobody eats. Vegetable number 2 is the cucumber, and cucumbers actually want to climb. Those curling tendrils aren't decoration. They're built-in grappling hooks. On the ground, cucumbers come out lopsided, pale on one side, and prone to a nasty rot on the belly of the fruit where it sits against wet soil. Give them netting or an A-frame instead, and gravity does the work for you. The fruit hangs straight down, colors evenly, and stays clean. But here's the trade-off almost nobody mentions. A vertical cucumber vine, fully exposed to sun and moving air, loses water faster than a ground-hugging plant. That's called transpiration, and it just means the plant is breathing more actively. Skip this detail and you'll end up with bitter, stunted cucumbers even though everything looks healthy. The fix is simple. Water the roots directly and consistently, ideally with drip irrigation at the base, rather than relying on the occasional deep soak that works fine for a sprawling plant. Trained cucumbers commonly out-yield ground-grown ones by close to 50% per square foot, and because you've lifted the vine off the soil, you've freed up roughly 80% of the ground it used to cover. Tuck in a few radish or carrot seeds underneath, and you're harvesting 2 crops from 1 footprint. If you take one thing from this vegetable, let it be this. Climbing frees the ground, but it also raises your water bill in effort, not dollars. Plan for it before you plant. Vegetable number 3 is the pole bean, and this is where a lot of home gardeners accidentally shortchange themselves without realizing it. Bush beans feel simpler, so that's what most beginners grab, but bush beans give you 1 harvest and they're done. Pole beans climb 10 to 15 feet up a teepee or an arch, and instead of 1 harvest, you're picking continuously for 2 to 3 months straight. Add it all up over a full season and pole beans routinely produce about 3 times the total harvest of bush beans grown in that same square foot. The common mistake is planting them too far apart out of habit, the way you'd space a bush variety. Pole beans actually want to be crowded close, 2 to 3 inches apart, right along the base of the climbing structure. Because they're not competing for ground space, they're racing each other upward. If you're gardening in a small space, climbing beans reward patience better than almost any other vegetable on this list. one packet of seeds, one simple trellis, and months of steady picking. Quick pause here. If this is the kind of practical, no-fluff gardening advice you want more of, hit subscribe now. I've got a whole library of videos on getting more food out of small spaces, and you won't want to miss what's coming. Now, back to the list, because the next vegetable is doing something for your soil that you can't even see. Vegetable number 4 is the pea sugar snap or snow pea. Take your pick. On paper, the yield looks unimpressive. A small fraction of a pound from a single picking. And that number alone makes a lot of growers write peas off as not worth the trellis space. That's the misunderstanding right there. Peas aren't a one-shot crop. Climbing varieties flower and pod continuously through the cool weeks of spring and again in fall. So that small number repeats itself over and over across the season. And here's what makes peas different from everything else on this list. Their roots host bacteria that pull nitrogen straight out of the air and store it in the soil, feeding whatever you plant there next completely for free. The mistake most people make is pulling peas the moment they slow down in early summer heat and leaving that bed empty. Instead, cut the vines at the soil line and leave the roots in place. That's where the nitrogen is banked. Plant a heavy feeder like squash or melon in that same spot right after, and you'll notice the difference without spending a dime on fertilizer. The takeaway to remember: peas are the one vegetable on this list that's still working for you even after you stopped picking it. Vegetable number 5 is zucchini and summer squash, and this is where airflow really earns its keep. A zucchini bush left to sprawl can shade 9 to 12 square feet, and packed that tightly, air barely moves through the plant, which is exactly the humid, still environment that squash bugs and powdery mildew love. Most squash varieties actually have one dominant central stem hiding under all that leaf growth. Stake that stem upright and strip away the aging lower leaves as the plant grows, and you compress the whole plant into a column under a square and a half. Standing it up opens the plant to moving air the same way it did for the tomatoes, which keeps the leaves dry and cuts down on both mildew and the pests that hide in dense, low foliage. Trained vertically, zucchini and summer squash produce over 3 times what a sprawling bush manages in the same square foot, some of the highest numbers on this entire list. The mistake that costs people the most fruit is waiting too long to stake the main stem, after it's already flopped over and started rooting sideways where it touches soil. Stake it early, before it ever has the chance to sprawl, and you'll never fight this battle. One more thing worth remembering: a zucchini plant standing straight up is a zucchini plant you can actually see. You'll stop missing those baseball bat-sized ones hiding under the leaves. Vegetable number 6 is small melons, cantaloupe, honeydew, and compact heirloom varieties. In a traditional flat layout, a single hill can eat up 15 to 25 square feet, which is why most home gardeners assume melons are a greenhouse-only crop. Trained up a heavy arch or cattle panel, that same vine takes a fraction of the ground space. As long as you support the fruit, a ripening melon can weigh up to 4 pounds, so sling each one in soft fabric or mesh tied to the trellis. Here's the science most people never hear. It comes back to that same shading problem from the very beginning of this video. A sprawling melon vine shades its own lower leaves, and shaded leaves make less sugar through photosynthesis. That's simply how a plant converts sunlight into energy. Lift the vine into open air and full sun, and more of the whole plant is actively making sugar, which channels straight into the fruit. That's why vertical melons often taste noticeably sweeter than ground-grown ones from the same seed packet. The mistake to avoid is skipping the sling. An unsupported 4-pound melon will tear right off the vine under its own weight. Support every fruit the moment it's the size of a golf ball, and you'll never lose one. Remember this: with melons, going vertical isn't just about space, it's about flavor you can actually taste. Vegetable number 7 is winter squash and mini pumpkins, butternut, delicata, and their smaller cousins. These have the same sprawling instinct as summer squash, just with heavier, longer-season fruit, and grown vertically on a reinforced arbor. They produce close to double what the same plant manages sprawled on the ground. But the real payoff with this one shows up in October, not July. Winter squash sits in the garden late into fall, right when the ground turns damp and rinds start softening and rotting from underneath. The same soil contact rot that plagued the tomatoes earlier, just on a slower timeline. Lift that fruit off the wet ground, and the rind stays dry and hard all the way to harvest. The mistake growers make here is choosing a flimsy trellis for a crop that gets heavier every week. A loaded winter squash vine needs the same heavy-duty support as melons, not the lightweight netting that works fine for peas. Because you're not waiting on sprawling vines to finish, you can also tuck fast-growing brassica greens into the freed-up soil in late summer for a second harvest before frost. The lesson worth keeping: winter squash rewards you twice, once with dry, rot-free fruit, and again with a bonus crop in the space it used to hog. Vegetable number 8 is one almost no American gardener has heard of, and it solves a problem every single one of them has: Malabar spinach. Regular spinach bolts, goes to seed and turns bitter the moment summer heat arrives, which is why so many gardeners give up on greens by July. Malabar spinach does the opposite. It thrives in the heat. Most people misunderstand it as a spinach substitute that needs spinach-style flat bed space, when really it's a true climbing vine, reaching 10 to 15 feet tall on a single square foot of ground when it's given strings or an obelisk to grab onto. The action that keeps it productive is simple. Pinch the growing tips regularly instead of letting the vine run unchecked, and the plant branches out sideways instead of just racing upward, which means more leaves within easy reach for picking. The mistake beginners make is treating it like lettuce and cutting the whole plant back hard. Malabar spinach recovers slowly from a heavy cut, so take individual leaves and shoot tips instead, a little at a time. The takeaway here is simple. This is the one crop on the list built specifically to fill the exact gap in your garden that shows up every July and August. Now, vegetable number 9, the one I promised you at the start. Strawberries don't climb at all. They're a low spreading crown, so on the surface, you'd think they have no business on a vertical list. But you don't train a strawberry plant upward, you stack the plants themselves. Grown in a modular tower, a fence-mounted rain gutter, or stacked growing cylinders, strawberries can be planted at 5 to 8 times the density of a flat ground bed. Picture it this way: a patch of ground that used to hold a dozen strawberry plants at soil level can hold 60 or more stacked in a tower. That's not an improvement, that's an entirely different scale of harvest from the same footprint. And every single plant sits up off the soil, which eliminates the ground rot, slug damage, and back-breaking bent-over picking that comes standard with a flat strawberry bed. The mistake that trips people up with towers is planting every pocket with the same variety. Strawberries planted this densely benefit from a mix of early, mid, and late-season varieties, so you're not drowning in fruit for 2 weeks and then getting nothing for the rest of the summer. If there's one crop on this entire list that proves vertical growing isn't just a space saver, but a total game changer, it's this one. Vegetable number 10 is the quiet finisher: kale, collard greens, and lettuce. These don't climb, and that's exactly why they belong on this list. They're the understory crop, living in the shade your tall trellises are already casting instead of wasting that space on bare dirt. Collards produce over a pound per square foot. Kale isn't far behind, and both translate to well over 15 servings per square foot when you count every leaf picked through the season, numbers that rival or beat almost everything else on this list without a single trellis of their own. The action here is simple. Tuck them along the north side of a tomato or cucumber trellis, wherever the sun would otherwise be wasted on bare soil. What surprises most growers is that the shade actually works in their favor. It slows down bolting and keeps the greens sweet and tender deep into months most gardeners have already written off as too hot for greens. The mistake is planting greens on the sunniest, most exposed side of the garden out of habit, where summer heat turns them bitter fast. Put them in the shadow instead, and that mistake disappears. The lesson to carry forward: not every vegetable needs to climb to benefit from vertical gardening. Sometimes the win is simply living in the shade, something else is casting. None of this works though, if the structure underneath it fails, and this is where a lot of first-time vertical gardeners get burned. A trellis loaded with ripening tomatoes or a cattle panel full of melons is heavy, and it catches wind like a sail. Skip the flimsy plastic stakes. Steel T-posts driven 1.5 to 2 feet into the ground, paired with real cattle panel wire or heavy timber, will hold through a summer storm that would flatten a cheap trellis. Run your trellises north to south so both sides of the canopy get even sun through the day instead of one side sitting shaded all afternoon. And remember that water lesson from the cucumbers. A dense vertical canopy loses moisture fast, and watering overhead just wets the leaves and invites the fungal problems you worked so hard to avoid. Run drip irrigation at the base instead, so the roots get what they need and the leaves stay dry. So here's what all 10 of these vegetables have in common. It was never about buying more land. Every mistake we covered today. Fruit sitting in damp soil, dense stagnant foliage, wasted shade, one-and-done harvests, comes from the same root cause, plants growing sideways instead of up. Fix that one thing, and tomatoes, cucumbers, beans, squash, peas, melons, spinach, strawberries, and greens all start pulling double duty on the same small patch of ground. You don't need a bigger yard. You need your existing plants pointed in a different direction. Now you know which 10 vegetables to grow up, but not exactly how to build a trellis strong enough to hold them through a real summer storm. That's next. Like this video, subscribe if you want more of these small space growing secrets, and drop a comment telling me which of these 10 you're trying first. Now go get that trellis in the ground.